tripod, good lens. Yeah, I remember that. Hi, so I wanted to begin this video with a disclaimer. I'm not currently on drugs, for anyone who was wondering. I really like charts though. So I made this chart a couple years ago. I think it's been about 2 years. It's managed to survive the ravages, but I think it makes a good illustrative summary of basically a general nature of God. And I really appreciate the method of having like a projector or something which I can spill ideas onto in maybe a more visual way versus like writing or even speaking. So this has been really helpful for me as like in sum, what, if you can see it, the nature of God, the nature of what I believe and what my faith is. So explaining the parts on here, you can see on the bottom left corner, kind of the same theme as I was talking before. There's a visual representation of what I believe to be the divine feminine, or L. You have a woman, there's a feminine symbol, there's an inverted triangle, which is meant to represent and has represented for a long time the vessel, or the one which, the substance, the one which holds. And then in the upper right, naturally, is the opposite, which would be A, represented by the image of a male, and the sword, the sun, as with the moon down here. Sorry, this is like weird material. But anyway, yeah, so we have the dualism of God. We have what you could just get away with calling the feminine, and then the masculine. And then between them is this pyramid shape. This actually came to me like a while ago when I was thinking about it as a visual way of trying to get to understand what it was I had in my mind. And this basically is, for lack of a better word, a hierarchy of states of being when it comes to human nature and when it comes to the living out of our souls during our life. And it's also, in this compacted image, it's also a kind of cosmology or a description of the cosmos, of how things are. Because up on the pinnacle, if you notice, I don't know if you can read it, but there's just, like, I've written kind of the terminology all around here, but it says up here the word union, and that serves as the pinnacle of the pyramid. You could say the pyramid of the nature of the universe or whatever. But union is the pinnacle because I think I mentioned this in a previous video, that basically the best way that things can be in this world, the ideal to which we ought to strive in our way of living, in our way of belief, in our way of in the way of like behavior, is a common union between the aspects of the divine. And that's sort of the object of our faith. That's what you do things for, more or less. This is like, I'm really cautious with the word goal, because I have this whole thing about like faith being more of a letting go than it is a chasing or a pursuit. It's not something that you can like grab and have, or it's not a trophy. But in this sense, for the sake of for now, I'll just say this is more or less the goal, so to speak. And we do that by practicing faith. And that's what the contents, the actual contents of this pyramid represent, is the precepts and the contents of the faith. So at the pinnacle of that, you have the union, or the ultimate state, heaven, whatever you want to call it. And each section that's cordoned off here sits on top of the other, meant to represent the progressive dependence of each level. So this bottom level is dependent on this, and this is dependent on this, and this ultimately is dependent on the greatest, the pinnacle of faith, or you could say like the pursuit of understanding God, or the pursuit of happiness. I don't know. In this pyramid, the contents of it, kind of ignoring this part for a second, these are meant to stand as, I use 3 words. At the bottom here, which is the broad base, is law. I use the word law. On top of law is the word principle. And finally, above principle, I use the word axiom. And I guess in reverse, I'll say what those mean. Axiom is actually a word I found on Google. That means, axiom is, the actual dictionary definition of it is self-evident truth. So we have the self-evident truth of things. And by things, I mean like everything. Like literally the universe, us, the sun, everything. The self-evident truth. And this is like immediately precedent to the heavenly state. So each is kind of a step up the pyramid, so to speak. But preceding the self-evident truth of things, the axiom, there's principle. You could also say moral principle. Moral principle, I believe to be the content of one's faith. Like it says, I think it's the book of James, it's in the Christian New Testament, but it says that don't be hearers of the word only, but doers also. This is where we're kind of sinking as we go down the pyramid. We're kind of sinking in more in pragmatic terms, not so much about faith or belief or what we go toward, but in practical terms of action, of things to do, things to avoid, like the knit and grit of what I believe faith to mean. So moral principle, or principle, is represented by the second tier here. And from the moral principles which we hold as faithful, that's where we get law. The point in this illustration is to show that principles or values are what ought to give birth to law. The do's and don'ts. Law is very much, as represented here, very much the do's and don'ts of, day-to-day life, like in matters of like mutual respect, and matters of treating people the way you would like to be treated. In fact, that's a good example, the golden rule. Treating others how you yourself would like to be treated. It's like a universal. I mean, so many cultures and religions have come up or produced with something along the lines of that sort of reflective, how would you like to be treated, thus treat others, you know. That I would consider maybe the golden principle. That I would consider definitely the principle. From that principle, it trickles down, so to speak, into actual do's and don'ts, like how you treat people, what's proper, what's appropriate, what isn't appropriate, all that stuff. And all that is super detailed, super like, you can come up with all kinds of like prohibitions and stuff. But that's like the knit and grit of what moral religion ought to be. But the point in the illustration really is more than that. It's not so much a list of commandments or a list of things like that, as it is to illustrate that moral law is derived from moral principle, is derived from higher principle. This is of the same essence or flavor as when I did that video of Jesus when he was talking about the heart of the law to the Pharisees, when he was rebuking the Pharisees. And I don't have my Bible like handy, but Jesus is saying basically, you strain out a gnat, but you swallow a camel. Like, this is the gnat. The law. The details. The technicalities of what's right and wrong. Right versus wrong, you know, what's moral and stuff. That's the gnat. This is the camel. So Jesus is basically saying, you abandon the principle behind the law, what actually makes good sense, the substance of your faith. And you violate that, swallowing a camel, like a big deal. But you spend so much energy and time on the technicalities of the law, violating the whole reason for it to begin with. And that's what I would call like moral inconsistency, or like when principle is missing, when you don't remember or honor the reason for the way things are, but we constantly look for what we can get away with around the law. So that's sort of a summary of this hierarchical pyramid on this. And I think I'll revisit this like whole chart thing on other videos, because there's a lot of like symbolism packed into this. But for now, thanks for watching.